Today, you are listening to Think Again Christian, where pop culture and Christian traditions collide with biblical truth. Sponsored by Rainier Christian Schools. And now your host, pastor of Ravensdale Bible Church and superintendent of Rainier Christian Schools, Tony Jamie.
Rethinking and re-examining concepts, ideas, traditions, and challenging your beliefs from American pop culture, your Christian denominational circles, and the way we do that is by the renewing of our minds through God's Word and through conversation. Thinking again. Isn't it amazing how powerful a piece of paper can be? I mean, think of it this way. The pen is mightier than the sword. Well, now the pen really has no meaning without the paper, right? So what's on the paper? And we just turn the phrase there, and we'll change it from now on. The paper is mightier than the sword, or something like that, and give me credit for it. But think about some pieces of paper that have really packed a punch in your life. Did you ever get one of your tests back that had a big giant red F on it? Or lots of red markings from the teacher or the editor? How about a late notice note on one of your bills, or notice of termination, or a pink slip, a rejection letter for a college application, or something that you've set your heart on? Maybe it's paperwork for a lawsuit. You've been served. Well, of course, these are all very negative pieces of paper that I'm talking about, but wow, I mean, what a powerful impact these types of papers have, and emotions and fear and anxiety and come into play, and even physically, immediately you can see something on a piece of paper and your heart starts pounding and you start sweating, and you feel that deep kick within your gut. Well, today we're going to see one of the most threatening letters ever written, and how one godly man responded, and this letter would become known as Hezekiah's prayer letter. Well, I'm always interested when the Bible actually, has the same story twice, right? The same story twice in two different books. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm making an assumption that I shouldn't make, but it makes me think, what? God really wants to make a point here. Because remember, he only has to say it once. I mean, he doesn't have to keep repeating himself. He says it once, and we're to follow and obey. And yet he's chosen this letter that Hezekiah receives, and in 2 Kings 18 and 19 it's covered, and in 2 Chronicles 29 through 32 it's covered, and we see this interesting story of the king of Assyria who issues a threat letter to King Hezekiah. Now, you have to understand the situation. Israel, the nation of Israel, is actually divided into two kingdoms, and one of the kingdoms names keeps the name Israel, and that's the northern kingdom. And the second, division is in the south of Israel, and they call it Judah. And Hezekiah comes in, and he's the 25 years old, and he's the new king, and he's torn down temples, and he's made changes and reforms, and Israel's actually following the ways of the Lord. And into his reign, he gets this letter from King Sennacherib of Assyria. Now you have to understand, Assyria's 9-0 in battle. They're blowing through the world. They're blowing through. I mean, if you remember Mike Tyson, you don't blink because you might miss the fight. It's going to be over in the first round, and he was just mowing through everybody, challenger after challenger. Well, this is Assyria. In Assyria, they send messengers and ahead and say, look, We're coming. We're going to give you fair notice, Hezekiah. Here's our resume. We defeated, that little place called Egypt, that little country, most powerful country in the world. Yeah, we took them down. That's why we were the heavyweight champions. And your friends up north, Israel, we've taken them out too. And they start listing all the nations and all the countries, by the way, all of which are more powerful than Judah. It's kind of like the Super Bowl champion, making a challenge to the team that's 0-15. We're coming to your field to play, or you can just give up now. We'll just cut out the middleman. This is a war against gods, and part of this letter that is laid out is, you keep claiming the God thing, but we've already taken out your God up north. And all the other gods of all the other nations, all the so-called gods, we've destroyed them too. And this is one of the things that we lose sight of when we're reading the Old Testament and in these battles these are God battles. These are God fights. Little God, not real gods. The other countries, the other nations, they know this too. That's why it's so important that we understand what's taking place. And by the way, we know they have at least 185,000 warriors, fighting soldiers. Give you some context. In America today, we have about 194,000 Marines. So what should Hezekiah do? If you were Hezekiah and you were the king and, hey, I'm a pacifist, right? I'm a preacher. I'm not a fighter. I'm a lover. What would you do? Surrender without a fight? Well, again, we have to know who Hezekiah is. And Hezekiah, his father was Ahaz, who was one of the worst kings ever. Worshipped foreign idols, sent away the priests. Just a terrible king. But his mom was the daughter of Zechariah. And in the first year that Hezekiah comes into his reign, we see that Hezekiah is a good king who follows after God. And I love the way it says it. In the first year of the first month. Now, anybody who goes into a new place, new leadership, whether it's a company, whether it's a church, your first moments are pretty important. Now, you don't want to make too big of a splash, but you need to make some kind of a splash. So what is it that you're going to hang your hat on in the beginning? And in the first year of the first month, he begins his spiritual reforms. And he opens the doors of the house of the Lord. He brings back the priests and the Levites. He rejects the wicked ways of the previous kings. He destroyed the idols and the high places. Israel had even come to the point where they were worshiping the bronze serpent. Remember the bronze serpent in Numbers that if you looked up at the serpent, once you got bitten, is a picture of Jesus on the cross, that you would be healed and not die from the snake bite. It's a great picture of the cross. Well, they began to worship that. So he broke it into pieces. Could you imagine such an awesome, symbol? But see, Hezekiah was a man of God, and it was a very dark time for Israel. Very dark time. And he was in a very difficult situation. Again, could you imagine being a new leader in an organization and you're trying to change the whole culture and maybe you're the only one who cares? So how does Hezekiah, a godly king, how does he do this? How does he respond to this letter? I love his response. He gets the letter and he spreads it out on the ground. He spreads it out before the Lord in the temple, in the house of God. He lays it out there and he starts to pray. Now, I'm going to make an assumption here. If he's laying it out on the ground and he starts to pray, I think he's still prostrate, on knees, maybe hands and knees, but I could be wrong. But nevertheless, he humbles himself before the Lord. Maybe it's a late notice, a pink slip, or bad news, and you don't know what to do with it, and your heart's pounding, and you're sweating, and you're anxious, and what do? And you get that letter, and you lay it down before the Lord, and you begin to pray. I want to look at three little aspects to this story, and some three guidelines that we can maybe glean from of how Hezekiah's address to God in prayer, how we can maybe see, a pattern, how we can see a pattern, how we see how he goes before God, and what's God's answer? I mean, how do you approach the throne of God? What is the official, emergency 101, prayer tactic 101? What do you say to God? What's the opening statement? And so I love looking at real prayers in the Bible, because you start to see a lot of different call signs for God. And so we see in 2 Kings 19, he says, "O Lord God of Israel." He personalizes it. Hey, not just the God of the universe, the God of creations, the God of Israel, my land, my country, my people, enthroned above the cherubim. Hezekiah recognizes that this is the God whose position is above even the angels. Thou art the God, not a God, not one of the gods, the God. Thou alone. Hezekiah, again, recognizing, I'm not just coming to you because I think, you're on our team or you're the best of the rest. No, you're the only one. You are the only God that there is. And then he refers to him as the living God. Not dead, not a piece of wood, not a stone, not marble, not an idea. You are the living God. O Lord, our God. Personalizing it. If you're struggling in your prayer life, if you're struggling with that intimacy with the Almighty, you know what? You can write these things down and you end the prayer. You start, "O Lord, God of Seattle. O Lord, enthroned above the cherubim. O Lord, thou art the God." There are no other gods. There are no other, Islam or, Buddha or any. You are the only God. You're the only way. And you're alive. You're alive today. And so when we come back, we will take a closer look at Hezekiah's prayer letter.
Since their small beginnings in 1963, the ministry of Rainier Christian Schools has been dedicated to educating and developing each of their students for the glory of God. And it's more than just a school. Rainier Christian Schools is actually an entire school district, with 3 schools serving the areas of Kent, Auburn, Covington, Renton, and Maple Valley. The Christ-centered environment weaves God's truth through everything they do, from top-notch academics all the way through their competitive sports programs. Learn more at rainiercsd.org or call 425-255-7273. That's 425-255-7273. Contact Rainier Christian Schools today.
Welcome back. You're listening to Think Again Christian, sponsored by Rainier Christian Schools. And now your host, Tony Jamie.
What do you do when you get that piece of paper that scares you to death, that makes you sad, that you don't know how to respond or what to do with it because it's serious and it threatens you? Well, Hezekiah, the king of Judah, received such a letter. It was a threat from the king of Assyria, a powerful king, a king saying that he was going to come and destroy Israel. And Hezekiah takes that letter and lays it out before the Lord and prays over the letter. And so we're looking at some of the lessons that we can learn in this prayer. And we're looking at particular 3 aspects of this lesson. One is, how we approach the throne of God, how we address God. What is the pattern that Hezekiah uses here? Is there a pattern, a method? And how does God answer? And so we already took a look at how Hezekiah refers to God in a very personal way, in a very respectful, way, but we also want to look at the pattern. Now, when we think of pattern, I always go back to the Lord's Prayer, right? The Lord's Prayer, and Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, right? And we've broken that down into, we adore God, and then we confess, and then we have a time of thanksgiving, and then we have a time of supplication where we ask, ACTS, the acronym. And that's a great way for us to kind of process and have a method or a pattern of prayer. There's not only one method, there's not only one pattern, and we see Hezekiah's patterns. He starts off with adoring God, and then extolling God and just giving him very high praise, and then he goes into his plea, and he's very specific about his prayer. That was one of the things that I've learned by studying Old Testament prayers is, a lot of times we just kind of hedge our bet, right? We think, well, we want to be in line with God's purpose and God's will, and I don't really know what God's purpose or God's will is, so I'm going to kind of pray this prayer that hedges on, I don't know. My wife's on her deathbed, but I don't know if God really wants to take her to be home, and that would be good for her to go into heaven, but I love my wife, and, I've got children, and you know what? I want my wife to live. If that's what you want, then ask the Lord to spare her life, knowing that he may have other plans, but be specific. And then we see this pattern of glorifying God throughout the prayer. Because that's what it's really about anyway. It's bringing God glory is our purpose. Well, we have the luxury of seeing God's answer in this great story of Hezekiah and that we see in 2 Kings 19. And we see that God answered, and he says, what? I've heard you. I heard. And I'll defend the city, and I'll save it. Why? For my sake and David. He goes back to covenant promise. He goes back to, God is a faithful God to his people. And so, as the prayer comes to God, God says, I'll defend the city. And I'll defend it because I've promised you that I will take care of you. And you know what else? I will make him fall by the sword in his own land. God starts getting a little specific about what he's going to do. Why? Because the king of Assyria has reproached and blasphemed the Holy One. The Holy One of Israel. This is not just a God. This is the one and only God. And by the way, King Sennacherib, you have just insulted God's chosen people. The Holy One of Israel. God even refers back to ancient times where he planned Israel's destiny. He planned that Israel, if they disobey him, that God would punish them. God would scatter them, but God would always be there and bring them back and have a remnant. He says, I will put my hook in your nose, my bridle in your lips. And we see the final culmination in 2 Kings 19:35 where the Lord's angel kills 185,000 Assyrian warriors. What an unbelievable answer to prayer. Unbelievable answer. Now, one of the aspects that I'm able to apply from Hezekiah's prayer letter is his unbelievable humility. I mean, as a pastor, as a father, a CEO, I'm supposed to, have all the answers. I'm supposed to be the answer guy. Hezekiah doesn't have a plan or a solution. The plan is to pray. That's the big plan. I mean, again, remember, he's the king. What are we going to do, king? And he looks at you and says, give me the letter. I'm going to lay it on the ground and I'm going to pray. How does that sound to you? Well, sometimes you're going to be against all odds. Sometimes you're going to be against a king that's 9-0, 185,000 warriors. You're going to be in a business deal. You're going to be in relationships, your school, career, etc. And it's not looking good. It's looking bad. What are you going to do? One of the other little cool aspects to this story is that we see that Isaiah is involved, and we see that God speaks through Isaiah to go communicate to Hezekiah. God put some people in our lives to help us. We're not alone. We're not alone out here. God's there. His Holy Spirit is within you, and there's brothers and sisters in Christ that uphold you. We're not alone. I'm often reminded of Hezekiah's prayer letter while I'm performing my duties at Rainier Christian Schools. One of my titles is I'm the superintendent of the schools. Well, what does that mean? It depends on who you ask. Some would call me the spiritual leader of the school. Some would call me the academic leader of the school. Some would say that I'm the business development or personnel or HR or manager. I'm the CEO. I'm the controller, the bookkeeper. And on a day-to-day basis, I deal with some tricky and interesting situations relationally between students and staff, and how do I handle that? What do I do when sometimes I get that long email? Well, you know what? Quite often I'll print it out. I'll literally print it out. I print out the email and I lay it down on the floor in my office and I pray over it. Before I make that decision, I pray for wisdom. I pray for discernment. I'll pray out my staff bios, and I have a picture of my staff and something about their family, and I'll pray over my teachers. I'll get my goals and the plans behind the goals, the action items, the strategies, and I lay those out, and I pray that God blesses and helps me with my efforts, and I pray that my efforts are accurate and right and godly, and I pray that they're His will and His desire, and I want Him to see my goals. And then recently we've been going over our budget for next year, and there's a lot of projections, there's a lot of calculations, and it's 150 sheets of 11 by 14 spreadsheets, and it's just number upon number upon number. And yet that's what drives our school financially, and to lay that out before the throne of God, to pray for accuracy, to pray for that wisdom and discernment. One of the great blessings that I've had in my life was a 2-year stint where for 2 straight years in my prayer journal, I prayed for $1 million to be donated to Rainier Christian Schools. And when I left for a time being, I stopped praying that prayer. And the interesting thing was, my prayer was that I wanted that gift to come in from an outside source that nobody in our organization could claim. I didn't want it to be a pride thing. I didn't want it to be something that we could say this was of man. We convinced somebody. We sold our program. I want it to be all about God. I want it to be all about this is what the Lord did for us through prayer. Just a pure outside gift. The interesting thing happened was when I became the superintendent at Rainier Christian Schools, on the first day, I received a notice of a gift of $1 million. You could only imagine what that did for my encouragement and for my faith. The cool thing was it was, about 4 years after the first day that I prayed that prayer. And immediately I went in and I got my prayer journal and I looked at the date and it was like, whoa, that's incredible. And guess what? None of us had anything to do with it. It wasn't because of me. It wasn't because of anybody on the staff. It was because of God. See, we're going to face challenges and over the course of the last year at Rainier Christian Schools, we've had a fire, we had a transformation blowout, we had flooding, 2 mortgages that were due, school closure, 2 campus changes, broken buses. There's been so many opportunities for us to beseech the Lord in prayer. And I'm just going to tell you, so many times they'll start with a piece of paper that I laid out on the ground and just prayed, using the example of Hezekiah. Well, if you're anything like me, my prayer life has gone through some cycles, some good cycles, some bad cycles. And I've learned, not to just pray, for responses. But the point of my prayer is the relationship the relationship that I'm building with the Lord, the conversation that I'm having with the Lord. And you know what? I don't always know exactly what to pray, but I love to see how God responds. And I pray boldly, and yet I pray in vulnerability and weakness. I pray for miracles and outrageous outcomes. Why? Because He's able, and He's a God who answers prayers. And so the next time you get that piece of paper that troubles you, lay it on the ground, and like Hezekiah, pray over it. Think again, Christian.
You've been listening to Think Again Christian, sponsored by Rainier Christian Schools and Tony Jamie. Rainier Christian Schools serves preschool through high school with 3 locations in the Renton, Maple Valley, Covington, Kent, and Auburn areas. For more information about Rainier Christian Schools, www.rainiercsd.org or call 425-255-7273.